Okay, Tom, you talked on it a bit in part one, but you shocked some people recently with a piece you wrote about the fixed odd betting terminals. Straight away, people were on social media saying that the Racing Post and you have been hypocritical, slating them when you've been actively promoting them in the past. Now, I'm not sure whether the Racing Post has actively promoted FOBTs in the past. Maybe you want to talk about that, and also, has the Post had a change of heart if they indeed had?
Well, to address the first part of whether we've supported FOBTs in the past, I think some of the criticism we've received over this subject has been unfair, because people have taken issue with the Racing Post running news stories reporting other people's warnings about FOBTs. For example, when the betting industry has warned that the results of sweeping restrictions on FOBTs would be catastrophic for racing, we've been lambasted. When people in racing have raised the same concerns, you know, and we've had racing industry executives estimating the loss in terms of income to British racing at 40 to 60 million pounds a year. So we've reported that, and people have had a go at us for that. Now, I think you cannot possibly accuse the Racing Post of supporting FOBTs, because it has raised legitimate issues about what their shackling will mean for the betting industry and for racing. It's our job as a newspaper to report the news, and I think there's always been an element of shooting the messenger there. People don't want to hear that side of the argument, and therefore they've decided that by giving it a platform of any description, the Racing Post is in favour of FOBTs. I dispute that. I don't think the Racing Post is in favour of FOBTs. In terms of whether we've been as critical of FOBTs as other publications, and as some people would want, I'd accept that we've not been, and perhaps that was something which now we can revisit. In terms of my piece, it was a sort of an industry-led news focus. So I was speaking to people within the industry, trying to trace the FOBT story in its totality from their origins in the late 90s, when a couple of bookmakers came up with these machines as as a way to increase the number of betting opportunities in their shops, through to the modern day when they're bringing in £1.8 billion a year for retail bookmakers, when punters are losing over £1,000 per head on the machines per year, and when they're being restricted by government because they've become politically toxic, associated with problem gambling, and now they're going to be restricted, and that's going to cost the betting industry dearly and the racing industry. So the piece that I've written is looking at how that came to pass, how FOBTs became toxic, and how the betting industry mismanaged this product and the controversy around them. And what I think is important from that is there's lessons to be learnt there for the gambling industry as a whole, because clearly the gambling industry has lost sight of public concerns about what sort of products they have, and how those products are pitched, and how people interact with them, and how they can lose money, and at what pace they can lose money. And I think it's really important that the industry understands those concerns, understands what society wants from a gambling industry and what they think is inappropriate. And clearly FOBTs crossed that line, and I don't think people in the gambling industry realised that quickly enough. I think it's very possible that we at the Racing Post did not realise it as quickly as we should have done. But what we're seeing now is a real reckoning in terms of society's attitudes towards betting, and I think it's important for the Racing Post to be contributing to that debate.
Do you feel that racing has lost a whole generation of potential lifelong racing fans because they've been directed to those machines rather than getting involved with, betting on horses?
It's an interesting question. I think from what I've seen is that there's not a lot of crossover between people who play machines and people who bet on horse racing. Now obviously you say if there weren't machines maybe they would have gone to horse racing. That's a what if that we can't answer for certain, but I think it's more likely that generation would have gone to football betting if they weren't going to go to properties, or they would have gone online where they can bet whatever they want on online casinos. If we're looking at whether racing has lost out on customers, and particularly younger customers, I think there are far bigger issues than properties.
Okay, now another feature that you wrote which caused a lot of stink was the one on the whip. Do you want to go there?
Sure, absolutely, let's do it. Well, I mean, I wrote that piece because, as I discussed before, I think it's a journalist's job to ask difficult questions sometimes and to raise controversial subjects. Now, just in case people forget, the piece that I wrote didn't say racing must ban the whip because the whip is terrible and it's a welfare issue. The piece I wrote said that I believe at some point in the future racing will have no choice but to get rid of the whip. Now, I could be wrong there. I no way set myself up as Mystic Meg with a crystal ball predicting the future. I don't know what the future is going to bring. What I do know is we have ample social history which shows us that in terms of animal welfare, you see a steady progression towards people having higher and higher standards, and we can look at that in terms of animal welfare, in terms of zoos, in terms of circus animals, in terms of fox hunting being banned and coursing being restricted, in terms of sort of food standards. We see a constant movement towards higher standards, and we also saw it in racing when in 2011 they introduced strict new whip rules. So what I was suggesting is that I think at some point in the future racing will, in order to sort of satisfy society's expectations of a sport that uses animals, have to restrict or get rid of the whip, because society won't be willing to accept a sport which involves people hitting animals, whether or not it actually hurts them.
Were you prepared for the almost hysterical backlash against you personally for writing that?
No, frankly, no. It was the first time I've had a response like that. I got 1,500 tweets in 24 hours, which is about sort of 5 years worth of tweets normally. And I didn't get any death threats, but I did get a couple of people who expressed a preference that I was dead, which is sort of a lack of commitment actually to their sort of opposition. But it took me aback. It did take me aback. I'm pretty thick-skinned. I can take that sort of stuff, but it really did sort of reveal to me just how sensitive some people were to what I thought was actually, first of all, legitimate debate, and second of all, something which concerns the rules of a sport. We're not talking life and death here. I thought if people cannot respond in a calm and reasonable way to something which is about the rules of a sport, then we're in a bit of trouble there. And it sort of raised for me as well how toxic social media has made some debates, because I just got a tiny little flavour of it. But if you're out there as a jockey or a trainer or a politician or a campaigner, or frankly any woman on social media, then you're going to get some incredible vitriol and some hysterical responses from people who are sort of incapable of arguing in a reasonable and civil manner, and I think that's quite worrying.
So is that something you've put out there now and you're just going to leave it out there, or is it something you're going to almost campaign actively against? Is it going to be your thing to try and make sure that comes to pass, that the whip is banned eventually?
No, not at all. And I wouldn't want to see it banned. I think it absolutely needs to remain for safety reasons. I think that's important to make that distinction. My piece was about the likelihood of racing being obliged to do this, and suggesting that it was more sensible for the sport to get ahead and do it on its own terms, rather than being forced to do it when society's values move against it. That is not a campaign I want to start. It's a columnist's job to inform, to make predictions, to start debates, but it's not a campaign. It's not something that I feel strongly about. It's not something which I personally feel is a necessity. I feel it's a debate that I started and people engaged with. Some in very good faith and some pretty angrily. It will come again. You know, anyone who thinks that the whip is only something that's brought up by the Racing Post or Racing Post columnists is wrong. It's going to come again, and whether or not the Racing Post ever writes another word about it.
Amongst all that vitriol, did you get any support from members of the racing community, leading members?
I did not get many people agreeing with my piece, but what I did get is a lot of people whose opinions I respect engaging with the piece in the spirit it was meant, which was that they read my arguments, they respectfully disagreed with them, or thought that things were going to pan out in a different way. And I thought that was an important thing to me, because while there were some people who just were sort of furious at me, people whose opinions I respect generally sort of said, you know, I don't agree, but it's an interesting piece, and you know, you can't ask for much more as a columnist than that.